Welcome to Purkey Horror Picture Show. This episode is all about Forbidden Planet from 1956. All right, Forbidden Planet from 1956 is a very, very famous science fiction movie from that era. There are quite a few B movies from that era, but the other bigger movies from that era, along with this one, are going to be like When Worlds Collide, which I believe comes up later in this series. You also got The Day the Earth Stood Still, which we already covered. And you get War of the Worlds, which is another great one from this era, which will not be in this list, but maybe someday we'll do that. Anyway, this one is going to star Walter Pidgeon as Dr. Morbius. I want to go back and check if it's Dr. Morpheus. I'm pretty sure it's Dr. Morbius. Anne Francis, who of course is mentioned in the song Science Fiction Double Feature. And Leslie Nielsen, who at the time was kind of known as kind of just a hunky, straight actor kind of guy. And he was in all these kind of action sort of movies. Eventually kind of came to fame again in his later life a couple times, partly as ensembles in some of the disaster movies, which were then later parodied in Airplane. And of course he had a scene in Airplane. His comedic chops were kind of discovered, and then he went on to the Naked Gun series, and from then on he was known as a comedic actor. So for anyone born in the last 30 or 40 years, you probably only think of Leslie Nielsen in terms of comedy, but this was when he was serious. So what about Forbidden Planet? Forbidden Planet is kind of your classic sci-fi. It's supposed to be in the future. So a couple things that are kind of cool about it. There's like a federation of planets, and so it's a little bit Star Trek-y in that sense. Our heroes are driving in, or they're flying in the flying saucer. There's also they're a military group, so you'll look at their suits that they wear, and they actually remind you a lot of some of the early suits, not the military armored suits, but the early suits you'll see in Starship Troopers. They also, like I said, it's like Star Trek a little bit, and they're a federation, and also a little bit like Alien or Aliens, where you've got a group of Marines or space military guys in this sense. I guess they're more like a sea ship in the way they use their terminology, but they're on their way to go to a planet where a previous group went missing. Very familiar. You'll hear this very alien-like or aliens-like in its idea there. A couple things that are notable right off the bat in this movie for its era is it's really beautiful. It's in CinemaScope, so it's got a wide screen. It's unusually high quality. And even now, looking back on it, I mean, certainly the sets have a kitschy quality to them, a little bit of campy quality to them, but they still look pretty amazing. Everything in this has that very 50s, 60s, space age design aesthetic. And that's something that you'll really enjoy when you watch this movie, if you watch it. Kind of Mad Men meets space. A lot of the scenes in here also will look like scenes from sci-fi novel covers that you see at the time. So really cool in that way. So I'm not going to get too much into the plot. It's a pretty good plot for those days. There are some interesting elements of psychology. The villains aren't just a straight up, space monster or evil aliens. There's a lot more going on here. And I think I remember hearing, and I didn't go back and research this, and I should have, that this is actually a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest. I might be wrong about that. Someone else can post this in there if they want to tell me. But the idea is they come to the planet, and all that's left is this Dr. Morbius, and his daughter, played by Anne Francis. So the drawbacks to this movie are really just going to be mostly in the plotting. As an older movie, so you've got to have the very old style sexual roles. There's the sexy daughter, space woman who doesn't know anything about guys, and these like wolfy space marine type dudes that are all vying for her affections and trying to teach her, how you kiss and all this kind of stuff. So you'll see a lot of stuff there that's pretty cringy. Those scenes are not so great. But beyond that, it's pretty great. The opening scenes are really good. You get this really amazing shot as they're flying towards the planet where they go across an eclipse of the sun. And it's beautiful. It's the kind of thing you never saw in those movies. Very evocative of the kind of later, higher end sci-fi that you get in movies in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Once again, I think Alien might have had a lot of inspiration from this movie as far as its look in some ways. I mean, obviously that's way grittier. About 2/3 of the way through, so the middle third is probably the worst because it has a lot of the romance and comedy stuff, and it's okay, but it's a little more talky. First third is really good. You're just kind of getting to the planet and all that stuff. The last third is really, really good. And there's a key scene where you basically go into the depths of the planet and you find out about the original civilization that basically lived there and were highly advanced and so on and so forth. And you get these scenes, and I'll put a couple in here, where they're going through the alien technology, this huge, epic alien technology. And even now, it looks amazing. And a lot of it has to do with, they used a combination of miniatures, practical sets, matte paintings, which matte paintings, if you're not familiar with that anymore, because they do CGI now, matte paintings where you would have a really high quality painting on glass, like a big piece of glass, and they would leave certain areas of the glass unpainted, and you could literally project moving image into the unpainted part of the glass. So in some of these scenes I show you, you'll see actual video, or not video, but actual filming of the characters walking through a set. Well, that's not a set, it's a painting. And in this case, I think it's kind of a combination of glass painting and animation, because you'll see there's movement in the background. So even though it looks dated, it looks very impressive and very epic. And it gave a lot of impact to this movie in its day for a lot of people to come. A couple other things I think that I saw as like influences definitely for future. There's a scene with a self-destruct mechanism in here, which I believe was an inspiration for the self-destruct mechanism in the original Alien. And I'll kind of show you them side by side. And they're not directly obvious, but I think that they're similar enough that I think Ridley Scott or the designers in Alien must have had an inspiration. Like, hey, let's make our self-destruct mechanism look a little bit like the one in Forbidden Planet. Because so many people that did sci-fi later on, loved Forbidden Planet. It's still considered a pretty great movie. Another thing you got in there is you've got a trailer for Forbidden Planet, and I just happened across this. I wasn't even thinking I was going to look at the trailer for Forbidden Planet. The trailer for Forbidden Planet, I think, probably was a huge inspiration to the beginning of Star Wars. And if you look at a little bit of this trailer, which I'm going to put in here, it has the yellow lettered crawl that there's no doubt that had to inspire the beginnings of all the Star Wars movies. So that was pretty cool. That was a discovery for me. I'd never seen that before, because I've seen this movie before. There is a monster towards the end of this movie, but I'm not going to describe what it is and why it is, because that's kind of a neat little twist in this movie. And actually, one of the more creative aspects of this movie is kind of the final monster and why it happens and what it actually is. It's a little bit dated in the way they do the monster, but I think it's still more effective than a lot of monsters from that era and very memorable. A couple last little mentions. One is the soundtrack is amazing, and we've talked in a lot of the other ones about this kind of theremin soundtrack you'll hear. This is kind of a variation on that, and all throughout this, it's really strange instrumentation. It's just like, weird sonic, radio frequencies and bloops and blips, and I don't even know how to describe it, but all through the movie there's these really interesting creative soundtrack. I should have looked it up. I didn't look up who did the score, but it definitely makes it a very gives a whole spacey feel to it. And then last but not least, you can't really talk about Forbidden Planet without mentioning Robbie the Robot. Robbie the Robot was probably, and you see it on the main poster, which is already flashed up here in a couple other scenes, kind of an iconic image from this movie. Really kind of set the template for robots going forwards. obviously was a huge inspiration for the robot that ended up being on the Lost in Space TV series. I mean, they were almost identical, and a lot of kids grew up watching Lost in Space. So Robbie the robot is pretty awesome, and once again, it's not stereotypical in the sense of how a lot of times robots were portrayed in those older movies, and a lot of times they were more of a menacing figure. In here, he's a lot like RoboCop. So once again, RoboCop was probably somewhat inspired by Robbie the Robot, because Robbie the Robot in here has built-in fail-safes, doesn't allow him, it's not like a directives like they were in RoboCop, but basically there's a whole little sequence in here where Dr. Morpheus goes to show you how Robbie has been programmed not to kill humans, and how if you try to make him kill humans, it goes against his directive, and it kind of almost makes him short out and kind of freeze up. So once again, cool little elements that have once again really influenced future sci-fi greats. So if you want to go back and see something from the 50s that really has that cool 50s feel, really high production quality, widescreen, beautiful color, amazing sets, ignore the silly romance parts of it a little bit. You can fast forward for maybe like 5 minutes or so here and there if you need to. But Forbidden Planet is great. For me, it's 5-star, and actually my 15-year-old watched it with me. I didn't tell him he had to watch it with me. I said, I'm going to watch it if you want to watch it, cool. If you don't, I expected he'd watch 5 minutes and walk away. He made it through the whole thing. He watched the whole thing, and actually I said, well, what would you rate it out of 5 stars? And he said, I'd give it 4 stars, Dad. And he kind of agreed. The whole romance part was probably the worst part for him, but he actually thought it was really entertaining. So I would say for me it's 5-star, for him it's 4-star. Pretty good recommendation. Go check it out. So coming up next will be the amazing B movie, giant bug movie. We got to have one of those in here. Tarantula.